The sound of rain echoed faintly against the giant glass windows of the Williams mansion, a home that stood tall like a monument of power. Marble floors shone under crystal chandeliers, and portraits of ancestors with stern faces hung along the walls. Men who had built an empire of wealth, one generation after another. To outsiders, this house was a symbol of success. To Daniel Williams, the billionaire heir, it was just a place he grew up in, cold and silent, always echoing with formality rather than warmth. But that night, something broke that silence. Something so unexpected that Daniel, despite being a man of discipline and control, found himself frozen at the doorway of his father's private study. His father, Mr. Williams, the man he admired and feared at the same time, was sitting hunched on a chair, his strong shoulders trembling. Tears streamed down the old man's wrinkled cheeks. But that wasn't the shocking part. What stunned Daniel to his core was who was holding him. Grace, the black maid who had worked in their house for as long as Daniel could remember, the one he rarely paid attention to, the one who blended into background in his daily life like the polished silverware or the freshly pressed suits laid out for him each morning. Grace, the woman who wore her hair neatly tied back, her uniform always clean but plain, her hands rough from years of scrubbing, dusting, cooking, and carrying trays. And yet, here she was, not standing behind him in silence, not serving tea, not keeping her distance as she always did. She was sitting close, holding his father the way a mother would hold a frightened child, her arms wrapped around him with tenderness, her hand gently patting his back, her voice murmuring something soft that Daniel couldn't quite hear. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He had never in his life seen his father cry. Not when Daniel's mother died. At least, that was the story he was told. Not when business collapsed once in the early years. Not when Daniel himself had nearly lost his life in a car accident as a teenager. His father had always been stone. Cold, strong. A man who believed that tears were weakness. And yet now, in the middle of the night, behind the closed doors of his study, that stone had cracked. The sight was so raw, so human, that Daniel felt as though he had walked into a sacred place he wasn't supposed to see. His heart pounded in his chest. 1,000 questions raced in his mind. Why is father crying? Why is Grace holding him? How long has this been happening? He had always thought of Grace as nothing more than the maid, a servant, someone who belonged to the house but not to the family. Yes, she had always been kind, polite, and dependable, but Daniel never once thought of her as anything more than background. She was invisible in the way all workers in the house were trained to be, present yet never acknowledged. But right now, there was nothing invisible about her. She was the center of the room. Daniel could see the way she looked at his father, not as a servant to her master, but as someone who cared deeply. There was grief in her eyes, but also strength. She was steady, while his father shook like a leaf in her arms. Daniel's throat tightened. He took a step into the room. The floor creaked under his shoe, and instantly both his father and Grace turned. Mr. Williams' eyes, red and swollen, widened when he saw his son. For a second, shame flashed across his face, as though he had been caught doing something forbidden. He straightened a little, but his body still trembled. Grace, however, did not flinch. She kept her arm around him, her dark eyes meeting Daniel's with a calm that unnerved him. There was no guilt in her stare, no apology. Instead, there was something else, something Daniel couldn't yet name. Dad. Daniel's voice cracked slightly, the shock making it softer than he intended. What was going on? Why are you crying? And why are you in Grace's arms? The words slipped out before he could stop them. He hadn't meant to sound accusing, but that's how it came out. His confusion turned his voice sharp. Mr. Williams opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He pressed a hand to his eyes, as though trying to hide his weakness. But it was too late. Daniel had seen. It was Grace who answered first. Her voice was low, gentle, but filled with weight. Because Daniel, sometimes even the strongest man needs someone to hold him. Daniel blinked, struggling to process her words. He looked from Grace to his father and back again. Nothing made sense. His father, the man who commanded boardrooms, who crushed competitors without blinking, who raised Daniel with rules stricter than steel, was sitting here like a broken child in the arms of the maid. "Dad." Daniel tried again, his chest tightening with worry. "What's happening? Are you sick? Did something happen?" His father's lips trembled. For the first time in his life, Daniel saw fear in the man's eyes. "Son, I—" But then his voice broke, and he could not continue. He leaned back into Grace, like a drowning man clinging to a raft. Grace's hand stroked his hair gently. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's time. He deserves to know." Daniel froze. Know what? His pulse quickened. What truth was Grace talking about? He took another step forward, his voice firmer this time. "Know what? What are you talking about?" Grace met his gaze again. This time, her eyes weren't calm. They were heavy, carrying something deep, something that had been hidden for years. "Daniel, your father has carried a truth for too long. And so have I. Tonight, it can't stay hidden anymore." The words hit Daniel like thunder. A truth? Hidden? For years? His eyes darted to his father, who was still trembling, unable to meet his gaze. Then back to Grace, whose eyes glistened with unspoken pain. Daniel's world tilted. All his life, he thought he knew his family, his history, his place. He thought he knew who his father was. But in that moment, standing in the doorway of the study, he realized he didn't know everything. And the truth, whatever it was about to change everything. The mansion, once cold and silent, now felt like a place of secrets. The portraits of his ancestors seemed to stare down at him, their painted eyes full of judgment. The rain outside grew heavier, as if the heavens themselves were bracing for what was about to be revealed. Daniel's chest rose and fell rapidly. His mind screamed with questions, but his lips could only form one word. "Why?" The silence that followed was thick. His father's sobs had quieted, but his shoulders still shook. Grace's arms still held him. Finally, Grace spoke again, her voice carrying a mix of sadness and strength. "Because the truth always finds its way out, Daniel. And tonight you were meant to see it." And just like that, Daniel knew his life would never be the same again. Daniel stood frozen, his hand still gripping the polished brass handle of the study door. His mind screamed for him to walk in, to demand answers, but his legs felt glued to the floor. Never in his 32 years of life had he seen his father like this, small, trembling, fragile. The image seared into him like fire. His father, one of the tower of strength, cradled in the arms of their maid. His chest rose and fell sharply, confusion tangled with disbelief. "Dad." The word left his lips like a whisper, almost pleading. Mr. Williams jerked slightly, lifting his head. His eyes, usually hard and piercing, were red and swollen. His lips parted, but only a shaky breath escaped. It wasn't the commanding voice Daniel was used to. It was the voice of a man defeated. "Dad," Daniel said again, louder this time, his voice cracking with a mix of urgency and fear. "What's going on? Why are you crying and in Grace's arms?" The question cut through the room like a blade. His father's face twisted, shame, pain, and hesitation all wrestling for control. He reached for his handkerchief, dabbing at his eyes, as though wiping away the evidence would undo what Daniel had just seen. Daniel's gaze snapped toward Grace. She was still sitting beside his father, her arm firmly around him, her eyes unblinking as they met Daniel's. It was the strangest thing. There was no embarrassment in her expression, no sign of guilt. Instead, there was a quiet strength, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. Her calmness unsettled Daniel more than his father's tears. All his life, Daniel had been taught that his father was unshakable. He was the kind of man who built empires out of nothing, who faced Wall Street storms with a steady hand, who looked at failure in the face and crushed it beneath his boot. When Daniel was a boy, he had once fallen from his bicycle and scraped his knee badly. Blood dripped down his leg, and he had cried, expecting comfort. But his father had simply crossed his arms and said, "Williams, men don't cry. Stand up, walk it off." And Daniel had obeyed. He learned then that pain was weakness, tears were shame, and strength was silence. But here, right in front of him, that very man, the same one who hardened him into the heir he was today, was sobbing into the arms of the maid. Daniel's heart twisted in his chest. Anger bubbled at the edges of his confusion. Grace. His voice came out sharper than he intended. What's happening here? What did you do to him? Grace did not flinch. She simply shook her head slowly. I did nothing to him, Daniel. Sometimes, the way of a man's heart breaks him more than the world ever could. Her words carried a strange authority, and it infuriated Daniel. Who was she to speak like that? She was the maid. She cleaned floors, she polished silver, she served dinner. She wasn't family. She had no right to hold his father in such intimacy, to speak at his father's heart as though she knew it better than his own son did. Don't talk in riddles. Daniel snapped, taking a step forward. Tell me what's going on. His father finally stirred, lifting his head from Grace's shoulder. His face was blotchy, his voice rough. Daniel, he rasped, struggling to find words. Son, His voice cracked, and he broke down again, burying his face into his hand. The sound tore at Daniel in ways he didn't expect. He had never heard his father cry before, and it was unbearable. His chest ached with helplessness. Grace's hand rubbed his father's back with steady circles. Her eyes softened as she looked at Daniel. You've seen him as the world sees him, a giant, unshakable. But every giant has a wound, and sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones we hide the longest. Daniel swallowed hard, his jaw clenching. His heart didn't know what to feel. Anger at Grace for speaking like she knew everything, or compassion for the broken man in front of him who, for the first time, was a giant at all. He lowered his voice, softer now, almost begging. Dad, please, talk to me. What's happening? Why are you like this? But his father only shook his head, his tears spilling anew. The sound of his sobs filled the room, heavy and raw, echoing off the tall bookshelves that lined the study. It was the sound of years of silence breaking all at once. Daniel pressed a hand to his forehead, pacing a few steps, his mind spinning. This couldn't be real. His father didn't cry. His father didn't need comfort. And he certainly didn't need the maid. And yet there was undeniable right in front of him. Grace's voice broke the silence again. He's carried a truth for too long, Daniel. A truth that has eaten him from the inside. Tonight it broke him. Daniel spun toward her. What truth? What are you talking about? Her eyes softened, her lips pressed into a line. For a moment, she looked as though she might speak, but then she glanced at Mr. Williams, who still shook in her arms. Her hand squeezed his shoulder gently, silently asking permission. Mr. Williams didn't answer. He just wept harder. The weight of it all pressed down on Daniel's chest. His father had always been the pillar, the one who never faltered. Seeing him like this was like watching a mountain crumble into dust. It frightened him, angered him, and yet somewhere deep inside it broke him too. For the first time in his life, Daniel realized something terrifying. His father was human, flesh and blood, weak, vulnerable, capable of breaking. He wanted to reach out to comfort him, but the distance between them felt too wide. Years of strict discipline, of commands without tenderness, of respect without closeness. It all stood like a wall between them now. Daniel didn't know how to cross it, so instead, he whispered again, his voice barely audible. Dad, please talk to me. But the only response was another quiet sob. Grace looked at Daniel, her eyes glistening. He will, Daniel, but you must be ready. The truth is heavy, and once it's spoken, nothing will ever be the same again. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. His patience snapped. Then tell me, he demanded. Tell me what's going on. I have a right to know. I'm his son. Grace's gaze held his, unwavering. Yes, she said softly. You are his son, and that's why the truth belongs to you too. But you must hear it from him, not from me. Her calmness infuriated him and soothed him at the same time. Daniel's chest heaved. He felt like a child again, standing outside a locked door, begging his father to let him in. Except this time, the door wasn't made of wood. It was made of years of silence, secrets, and pride, and he feared that whatever was behind it might shatter everything he thought he knew about his family. The room grew unbearably quiet, broken only by the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the corner and the muffled sobs of Mr. Williams. Outside, The rain lashed against the windows harder, as if the storm itself was echoing the turmoil inside. Daniel's heart pounded louder than both. Something was coming. He could feel it, and deep inside, he wasn't sure he was ready. For as long as Daniel could remember, Grace had been part of the house. She was there when he rushed down the marble staircase in the mornings for school. She was there when he came home late from parties, standing quietly with a tray of water and a folded napkin in case he needed it. She was there when he left for college, her hands folded in front of her, offering a polite nod as the car pulled away. But in all those years, she had been nothing more than a shadow in his life. Always present, never acknowledged. Grace was a maid. That was all she was to him. When Daniel was a boy, he thought of her the way he thought of the grandfather clock in the hallway or the chandeliers above the dining table. Fixtures of the house. Useful, dependable, unchanging. He had never thought of her as a person with feelings, or as someone who might carry stories of her own. He couldn't even remember the sound of her laughter. Did she ever laugh? Did she ever rest? Did she have a life outside these walls? Daniel had never asked. He had never cared. And yet, tonight, everything felt upside down. Grace didn't look like the maid anymore. She didn't even look like a servant. Sitting there, her arm firmly around his father, she looked like something more like family. The realization unsettled Daniel in ways he couldn't explain. He narrowed his eyes at her, trying to make sense of it. His father, the man who commanded respect from senators, businessmen, and even presidents, was leaning on her like a helpless child. It was wrong. No, not wrong. Impossible. The silence in the room pressed down on him until his chest felt tight. He could hear his own breathing, fast and uneven, as though his body was preparing for a truth his mind couldn't grasp. Grace turned her gaze toward him. Her dark eyes were steady, almost too steady. They seemed to look right through him, past his defenses, past the armor he had built as a billionaire heir, straight into the boy he once was. And in that moment, Daniel remembered something. A flash, a fragment, buried deep in the vaults of his memory. A soft voice humming in the night when he was sick as a child. Warm hands pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. The faint smell of lavender soap. He had always thought it was his mother. That's what his father told him, that his mother had cared for him until she passed. But as Grace's eyes locked with his now, something in him stirred. The memory, the warmth, the comfort, it matched her. His stomach flipped. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. No, that's ridiculous. She was just a maid. It had to be mother. And yet, Grace's hand stroked his father's back, her voice low as she whispered words Daniel couldn't hear. It wasn't the voice of a servant. It was the voice of someone who knew him, who had known him for years. Daniel's throat tightened. What is this? He demanded, his voice breaking. What's going on here? Why do you... He pointed at Grace, his hand trembling. Why do you look at him like that? Why do you hold him like that? Grace's lips pressed together in a thin line. Her gaze didn't waver. Because sometimes a heart doesn't choose its family by blood, Daniel. Sometimes love creates bonds stronger than blood ever could. Her words struck him like lightning. He staggered back a step, shaking his head. No, you're just a maid. You clean this house. You don't. His voice cracked and he stopped. The words felt empty, even as he spoke them. Grace tilted her head slightly, her eyes soft but piercing. You see me as a maid because that's the role the world forced me into. But your father, he sees me as something more. And deep down, Daniel, so do you. Daniel's breath caught. His heart pounded in his chest. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind, but none formed fully on his tongue. His father shifted slightly in Grace's arms, groaning softly. He looked up at Daniel, his face weary, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of guilt and longing. His lips trembled as though he wanted to speak, but he said nothing. He just leaned back into Grace, as if her presence was the only thing holding him together. The sight twisted Daniel's insides. It didn't make sense. His father had always been the strong one, the untouchable one. But now, his strength came from her. Daniel's chest burned. Why? He whispered, more to himself than to them. Why do I feel like there's something here I was never told? Grace's eyes softened even further, filled with sorrow. She brushed a tear from Mr. Williams' cheek and said quietly, "Because there is Daniel. There's something you were never told." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake the truth out of them. But another part of him, smaller, quieter, was afraid. Afraid that the truth would break the foundation of everything he thought he knew about his life. He closed his eyes, memories flooding him. The lullabies, the gentle hands, the feeling of safety in the night. And now, staring at Grace, he wondered, had it always been her? He opened his eyes again, his vision blurring with unshed tears. He had never cried in front of his father before. But tonight, everything felt different. The walls between them were crumbling. "Tell me," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. "Tell me the truth. Who are you really, Grace? And why does it feel like you've been part of me all along?" Grace looked at him, her eyes shimmering, her lips parted as though to speak. But then she glanced at Mr. Williams again. Her hand tightened gently on his shoulder, waiting for a signal. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His father's silence was louder than any words. It was confirmation. Confirmation that Grace's bond with their family wasn't what he thought it was. He stumbled back a step, his knees weak. His entire world felt like it was tilting, the ground beneath him crumbling. All his life, he thought he knew who he was. The billionaire heir, the only son of a powerful man, the product of wealth and privilege. But now, staring at the maid who didn't look like a maid anymore, he wasn't sure of anything. And deep down in the pit of his soul, Daniel knew one thing. Whatever truth Grace carried, it was about him too. The study was thick with silence, the kind of silence that feels alive, like it has weight, like it presses against your chest until you can hardly breathe. Daniel's eyes darted between his father, slumped in Grace's arms, and Grace herself, who sat calm but unmovable, like a rock in a storm. Mr. Williams' face was pale, his hands trembling as he tried to hide his tears behind them. He looked nothing like the man Daniel had grown up with. The father Daniel knew was carved from steel. His jaw had always been set, his eyes sharp, his word precise and unforgiving. Weakness was something he never tolerated, from himself or from others. But tonight, weakness dripped from him like rainwater breaking through cracks in the roof. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. His instincts warred inside him. One part wanted to rush to his father's side, to comfort him, to be the strong son he might need. But another part, the sharper part, wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake the truth out of him. Because this wasn't just about tears. This was about secrets. He could feel it. Finally, Mr. Williams took a deep, rattling breath. His voice came out broken, like a man confessing sins at the altar. "Daniel," his lips trembled. "My son, I never told you everything about our past. I should have, but I couldn't." Daniel froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had been right. There was a secret. His father's hands gripped the arms of the chair tightly, his knuckles white. "I was afraid." Daniel frowned, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. "Afraid? Afraid of what?" "You've never been afraid of anything in your life." Mr. Williams squeezed his eyes shut, his jaw quivering. He couldn't look at his son. It was Grace who answered, her voice steady, though tinged with sorrow. "Afraid you would hate him, Daniel. Afraid you would hate me." The word struck Daniel like a slap. His head snapped toward her. "Hate you? Why would I hate you? You're the maid. You've done nothing but serve this house your whole life. Why would I hate you?" Grace's gaze didn't waver. Her voice softened, but there was power beneath it. Because the truth is never as simple as it looks. And because sometimes when people learn what's been hidden, their hearts are not ready to forgive. Daniel felt the room tilt around him. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "Stop speaking in riddles. Just tell me what's going on. What are you hiding from me?" Grace's eyes flickered toward Mr. Williams, who sat trembling, his face wet with tears. She laid a hand gently on his shoulder, her touch steadying him. "It's time," she whispered. "He deserves to know." Daniel's chest tightened. His breath quickened. His father lifted his head slightly, meeting Daniel's eyes at last. "Daniel," he croaked, his voice low and hoarse. "I've lived my whole life with pride. Too much pride. I built this empire. I raised you to be strong, unbreakable. But in doing that, I built walls, not just around you, but around myself. Walls to keep out shame. Walls to keep out the truth." Daniel's throat burned. What truth? His father's face twisted in anguish. His lips opened, but words refused to come. He shook his head violently, as though the truth was too heavy for him to carry. Grace's hand tightened on his shoulder again. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," she said softly. "Let him share the burden." Mr. Williams' eyes brimmed with fresh tears. He buried his face in his hands again, shaking his head. Daniel's frustration boiled over. He slammed a hand against the wooden desk beside him, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice trembling. "I've spent my whole life trying to be the son you wanted me to be. Strong, successful, perfect. But right now, I don't care about any of that. I just want the truth. For once in my life, stop hiding from me and tell me what's really going on." His words hung in the air, raw and desperate. The old man flinched at the outburst. For a moment, Daniel thought he might finally break through, that his father would speak. But instead, Mr. Williams only wept harder, his shoulders heaving. Daniel fell helpless. Anger drained from him, leaving behind only fear and confusion. He had never seen his father like this. It terrified him more than anything ever had. He turned to Grace, his eyes burning. "If he won't tell me, then you will. You clearly know something. What is it? What's the truth you keep talking about?" Grace's eyes softened, full of pity, but she shook her head slowly. "No, Daniel, this is not my truth to give. It belongs to your father. Only he can say it." Daniel's voice cracked. "Then what am I supposed to do? Stand here and watch him fall apart?" Grace's gaze locked with his, steady and unyielding. "You're supposed to be patient. You're supposed to be the son who doesn't turn away when his father is weak. That is how you will get your truth, by staying, not by demanding." Her words cut him deeply. He wanted to argue, to shout, to insist that patience wasn't enough. But something in her tone silenced him. It was strange. Grace had never spoken to him this way before. She had always been polite, careful, almost invisible. But tonight, she was different. She was strong, commanding, unafraid to challenge him. It unsettled Daniel, but it also forced him to listen. He sank into the chair opposite his father, his hands trembling slightly. His eyes never left the old man's face. "Dad," he said softly now, almost pleading, "please, I don't care what it is. I just need you to tell me. Whatever this truth is, I can handle it. I need to hear it from you." His father's breath hitched. His fingers gripped the armrest of the chair. For a moment, Daniel thought he might finally speak. But then he broke again, his head bowing, his tears dripping onto the floor. Grace's hand stroked his hair gently, like a mother calming her child. She leaned down and whispered something too soft for Daniel to hear. Daniel's heart clenched. He had never seen anyone touch his father with such tenderness. He had never even dared to try. And in that moment, he realized something that chilled him to the bone. Grace knew his father in a way he never did. The thought left him shaken, staring at the two of them, his mind screaming with questions. Who was she really? And why did it feel like she belonged more to his father's heart than he ever had? Grace's eyes lingered on Mr. Williams, waiting, almost pleading for him to speak. But the old man sat frozen, his lips trembling, his chest heaving with the weight of a truth too heavy for him to lift. Finally, Grace straightened her back and let out a long, steady breath. She turned her gaze to Daniel. Her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of years. "Daniel," she began slowly, "I wasn't just your maid." Daniel blinked, his heart jolting. "What are you talking about?" His voice was sharp, but beneath it lay a tremor of fear. Grace's hands folded neatly in her lap, though her eyes never left his. "Years ago, when you were a baby, when your mother was no longer here, I became your nanny. I was the one who held you through the night when you cried. I was the one who fed you when you were hungry. I was the one who sang you to sleep when the house was too silent. Daniel's mouth went dry. He shook his head violently. No, no, that's not true. My father told me. He told me my mother raised me until she died. He said she was the one who cared for me. Mr. Williams let out a broken sob. His face fell into his hands again, as though the shame of his lies was too much to bear. Grace's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. Your father told you what he thought would protect you. He told you what he believed was easier than explaining the truth. But the truth, Daniel, is that your mother left when you were only a baby. And when she did, I stepped in, not because I had to, but because I loved you, because I couldn't bear to see you grow up without a mother's arms around you. The room tilted around Daniel. His heart hammered in his chest. He stumbled back a step, his knees weak. No, that doesn't make sense. But even as he said the words, memories flooded his mind. A soft humming at night, when he was too young to understand where the voice came from. Warm hands pressing against his back when he cried. The faint scent of lavender that always lingered near his pillow. The way someone had whispered prayers over him when he was sick. He had always thought it was his mother, always believed it was the woman he had never really remembered, but whom his father had painted as a saint. But now, as Grace's words wrapped around him, the pieces began to shift, and the picture they formed was not of his mother. It was of her. His stomach churned. He pressed his palms against his temples. This can't be real. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did you let me believe she was there when she wasn't? Grace's face was calm, but her eyes glistened. Because your father asked me to. Because he thought it would be kinder to let you believe in her than to know the truth about her leaving. He didn't want you to grow up with anger in your heart. He wanted you to honor her memory, even if that memory wasn't real. Daniel turned sharply toward his father, his voice breaking. Is this true? Tell me she's lying. Mr. Williams lifted his head, his face streaked with tears. He shook his head slowly, his voice hoarse. She's not lying, son. I couldn't bear to tell you the truth. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if you knew your mother had abandoned you, you would hate her. And maybe you would hate me too. Daniel's chest caved in, the air leaving his lungs like a punch. He staggered back against the edge of the desk, gripping it for support. All these years, you let me believe a lie. You let me think I had a mother who loved me. And all this time it was her. He pointed at Grace, his hand trembling. It was her. Grace lowered her gaze, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Yes, Daniel, it was me. Daniel's throat burned with unshed tears. But why? Why would you do that? You weren't family. You didn't owe me anything. Her eyes lifted again, filled with quiet strength. Love doesn't need permission, Daniel. Love doesn't wait for titles. I didn't raise you because I had to. I raised you because when I held you in my arms, my heart told me I couldn't let go. You were not born in my body, but you were born into my heart. Her words sliced through him like a knife. His chest ached with confusion, guilt, and a strange sense of gratitude he didn't know how to express. He remembered birthdays. Cake set before him on the table, a soft voice singing behind him. He remembered scraped knees, gentle hands cleaning the wound, a soothing voice promising it would be all right. He remembered nights of loneliness, someone sitting at the foot of his bed, humming until he fell asleep. It was always her, always Grace. And yet he had never seen her. Not really. To him, she had always been just the maid, a nameless presence in the background. And now, the realization of how blind he had been crushed him. Tears pricked his eyes, but he blinked them away. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you let me know it was you all along? Grace's voice trembled slightly now, though her composure remained. Because your father asked me not to. He wanted you to grow up believing you had a mother who never stopped loving you. He thought it would make you stronger, and I kept that promise. Because I loved you enough to stay silent. Daniel shook his head, his heart shattering. So you gave up everything? Your own life, your own recognition, your own identity, just so I could grow up believing a lie. Grace's lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. I didn't give up my life, Daniel. I gave it to you. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Daniel pressed a hand to his chest, as though trying to hold his breaking heart together. His knees buckled, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse. The room swam before his eyes. He looked at his father again, anger flaring through his tears. You let her do this? You let her sacrifice everything while you stood by and said nothing? You let me grow up blind to the truth. Mr. Williams' face crumpled with shame. His voice cracked as he spoke. I was a coward, son. I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself. I was too proud to admit that the woman I loved left me, too ashamed to admit that the only reason our family survived was because Grace stepped in. She gave you everything, and I gave her nothing in return. Daniel's tears finally spilled down his cheeks. His whole body trembled. He turned back to Grace, his voice breaking. And you, after all that, you still stayed? Grace's eyes shimmered, but her smile held steady. Yes, Daniel, I stayed, because love doesn't walk away. Because family isn't always blood. It's the people who never let you fall, even when they're asked to stay invisible. Daniel's vision blurred with tears. His knees finally gave way, and he sank to the floor, his hands covering his face. His sobs filled the room, echoing against the walls. And through it all, Grace sat quietly, her presence strong and steady, the same way it had always been, his silent protector, his unseen mother, the heart that had carried him when he didn't even know she was there. For the first time in his life, Daniel saw her, truly saw her, and his world would never be the same again. Daniel sat crumpled on the floor, his hands pressed his face, his shoulders trembling with sobs he could no longer contain. All his life, he had been told to be strong, to hide weakness, to keep his emotions buried. But tonight, all of that training shattered. Tonight, the walls his father had built inside him came crashing down. The truth was out, and it was heavier than anything he had ever imagined. Grace watched him quietly, her eyes full of sorrow but also of love. She did not rush to him. She knew this was a storm he needed to ride out on his own before she could steady him. Mr. Williams, however, looked like a ghost. His face sagged, his eyes dull with shame. His whole body leaned forward in his chair, as though the weight of years of lies pressed him down. He reached a trembling hand toward his son, but stopped halfway, as if afraid Daniel would recoil from his touch. Daniel! His voice cracked. Please look at me. But Daniel couldn't. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, his tears soaking the palms of his hands. Every word Grace had spoken replayed in his mind like echoes he couldn't silence. She fed you when you were hungry. She held you through the night. She sang you to sleep. It was always her. The nameless lullabies, the gentle hands, the lavender scent. All the pieces clicked into place, and it hurt more than he thought possible. Finally, Daniel lowered his hands, though his face was streaked with tears. His eyes, red and swollen, locked onto his father. You lied to me, he whispered, his voice hoarse. My whole life you lied to me. Mr. Williams flinched. He clasped his hands together tightly, his knuckles white. I did, and I will regret it until my last breath. But, Daniel, you must understand, I thought I was protecting you. Daniel's voice rose, raw with pain. Protecting me from what? From knowing the truth about the woman who left me? From knowing that the only person who actually loved me, truly loved me, was someone you made invisible? You didn't protect me, Father. You robbed me. You robbed me of the chance to know her. He pointed at Grace, his whole body trembling. Grace's eyes shimmered, but she shook her head gently. Daniel, don't blame him alone. I made the choice too. I kept the promise. I could have told you, but I didn't, because your father begged me not to, because he thought it was best for you. And I loved you enough to put your peace above my own recognition. Daniel turned to her, his chest burning. But it wasn't peace. It was a lie. I grew up thinking I had a mother who loved me, but it wasn't her. It was you. And I never even knew. I treated you like a servant. I barely looked at you. His voice cracked on the last words, his guilt clawing at him like fire. Grace's lips curved into a soft, sad smile. You were a child. You weren't supposed to know. I didn't raise you for recognition, Daniel. I raised you because my heart couldn't do otherwise. Whether you saw me or not, whether you thanked me or not, it didn't matter. What mattered was that you grew up with love around you. That was enough for me. Daniel's vision blurred again with tears. He shook his head. But it wasn't enough for me. Not now. I can't believe I didn't see you. That I didn't know it was you all along. Grace leaned forward slightly, her voice tender. Children don't always see the hands that hold them. They only feel the warmth. And that was all I ever wanted, that you felt loved, even if you didn't know where it came from. Her words sank into him, deep and heavy. Mr. Williams groaned softly, his face buried in his hands. I destroyed everything. I thought I was saving you both, but I only created more pain. My pride, my fear, it blinded me. Daniel's jaw clenched. He wanted to scream at his father, to unleash all the anger boiling in him. But when he looked at the old man, frail, broken, drowning in regret, the anger wavered. For the first time, he saw not the ruthless billionaire, but a man terrified of losing everything he loved. You should have trusted me, Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. You should have trusted me with the truth. I know, his father choked out, and I will carry that failure to my grave. A silence fell over the room again, heavy and suffocating. Grace finally stood, her movement slow but deliberate. She walked over to Daniel, knelt beside him on the floor, and gently took his trembling hands into hers. Her touch was the same as it had been in his childhood, steady, calming, safe. Daniel, she said softly, you have every right to be angry. You have every right to feel betrayed. But don't let anger blind you to what is still true. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. And what is that? Her eyes, deep with love, met his, that you were never unloved, not for a single day. I may have been asked to stay silent, but my love for you was never silent. It has always been here, surrounding you, carrying you, whether you saw me or not. His chest heaved, his throat burning with emotion. He searched her face, and for the first time, he saw her not as a maid, not as a shadow in the background, but as the woman who had been his unseen mother. His voice cracked. Grace, I don't know how to forgive myself. Grace's smile widened slightly, tender and warm. There is nothing to forgive, child. You didn't know. Forgiveness is not for you. It's for your father. And even then, it will take time. But as for you, she placed a hand gently on his cheek, just as she had done when he was small. I never needed your thanks. Loving you was never a burden. It was my greatest joy. Daniel broke again, fresh tears spilling down his face. He leaned forward, collapsing into her arms. For a moment, he was no longer the hardened man his father had molded him to be. He was a boy again, broken, searching, but finally home. Grace held him tightly, her hand stroking his hair, whispering softly as she had done countless nights in his childhood. Sure, it's all right. You're all right. You've always been loved. Mr. Williams watched the scene, his chest tightening with both grief and relief. He had feared this moment for years, feared that the truth would shatter his son. And though it had broken him in a strange way, he also saw healing. The walls were crumbling, but in their place, something new was forming. Something truer, something stronger. He leaned forward, his voice weak. Grace, Daniel, I don't deserve either of you. But if I could ask for anything, it would be one chance. One chance to make this right before my time runs out. Daniel lifted his head from Grace's shoulder, his face wet with tears. He looked at his father long and hard. Anger still burned in him, but so did sorrow, and beneath both, a fragile thread of love he couldn't cut. He didn't answer yet. He wasn't ready. But for the first time, he didn't feel only rage. He felt the beginning of something else, something he couldn't name yet. Grace reached out and touched both men's hands, joining them together. Then start here, she said softly. Start with honesty. Start with love. It's never too late. And for the first time that night, Daniel allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't. The study felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel remained on the floor, his chest still heaving from the storm of emotions, his hand resting in Grace's. She sat beside him, steady and unshaken, as though she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Across from them, Mr. Williams sat hunched in his chair, his face shadowed by shame. His trembling fingers toyed with the edge of a handkerchief, but he couldn't lift his eyes to meet his son's gaze. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, Daniel broke it, his voice raw and cracked. "You said there's more," he whispered, staring directly at his father. "This can't be all of it. I can feel it. There's something else you're not telling me." Mr. Williams stiffened, his jaw tightening. His eyes darted toward Grace, as if silently begging her to intervene. But Grace only gave him a firm nod, her expression calm yet resolute. "It's time," she said softly. "You've hidden the truth for too long. He deserves to know all of it." Daniel's pulse quickened, his fists clenched at his sides. "All of it? What do you mean, all? You've already turned my life upside down. What else could there possibly be?" Mr. Williams finally lifted his gaze. His eyes, red-rimmed and weary, met his son's. "There's something about your mother. Something I never told you. Something Grace has carried all these years, because I couldn't." Daniel's heart lurched. "My mother? What about her?" His father took a long, shaky breath, his hands gripping the armrest of his chair, as if to keep himself from falling apart. "The woman you were told was your mother, your biological mother, didn't just leave because she couldn't handle the life I built. She left because she never wanted this life at all. She was never meant to be in this family. And the truth is..." He stopped, his voice choking. Grace leaned forward, her hand gently resting on his arm. "Say it," she urged softly. "He needs to hear it from you." Daniel's eyes darted between them, his heart thundering. "Say what?" Mr. Williams shut his eyes tight, then forced the words out like broken glass tearing from his throat. "Grace is not just the maid who raised you, Daniel. She is your mother's sister. Your aunt." The words slammed into Daniel like a tidal wave. His mouth fell open, but no sound came. His entire body went cold, his heartbeat thudding painfully in his chest. "My aunt?" he finally croaked, his voice faint. Grace's eyes glistened with tears, but her face remained calm, as though she had rehearsed this moment in her heart countless times. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Daniel. Your mother and I, we were sisters." Daniel staggered his feet, stumbling back a few steps. He shook his head violently, his hands clutching at his hair as though he could rip the confusion out of his mind. No, this can't be true. All these years, you lived in this house, right under my nose, and you never told me? You let me treat you like a stranger, when all along you were my family." His voice broke, the pain raw and sharp. Grace stood now, her hands folded gently in front of her. She didn't move toward him, but her voice wrapped around him with calm certainty. "I kept the truth because your father asked me to. He thought it would complicate things, confuse you. He wanted you to have one story, one version of the past to cling to. But yes, Daniel, I am your mother's sister. And when she left, I couldn't bear to abandon you too. You were blood. You were mine, in a way she could never understand." Daniel's knees weakened. He grabbed the edge of the desk for support, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. "My God," he whispered, his voice cracking. "All this time, you were family, and I didn't even know. You were the only one who stayed, and I never even called you by your name with respect. I treated you like you were nothing." Grace's lips trembled, but her voice remained steady. "You were a child. You didn't know. And I never needed the title of aunt to love you. I didn't stay because of duty. I stayed because you were part of me, because you were innocent, and I couldn't let you grow up without love." Tears blurred Daniel's vision. His chest tightened until he thought he would suffocate. He turned to his father, rage flaring hot again. "You knew this. You knew she was my family, my blood, and you hid it from me. Why? Why would you keep something so important from me?" Mr. Williams' voice shook. "Because I was ashamed. Ashamed that the woman I loved left me. Ashamed that her sister had to pick up the pieces of my broken family. Ashamed that I failed you both. I thought if you knew, you would see me for what I was, a coward, and I couldn't bear that." Daniel's hand slammed against the desk, his anger spilling out. "You thought lies would make you look stronger? They didn't. They made you weak. They made me blind." His father winced, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You're right. I was weak, and I'll never forgive myself for it." The room crackled with emotion, the weight of decades of secrets pressing down on all three of them. Grace stepped forward, her voice cutting through the storm. "Enough, both of you." Her tone was calm, but it carried the authority of someone who had carried too many burdens for too long. "You cannot change the past. You cannot undo what was hidden. But you can choose what to do with the truth now. Daniel, you have every right to be angry, and your father has every reason to feel shame. But if you stay trapped in those feelings, nothing will heal. The truth was hidden so long, not to destroy you, but to protect you, even if it was the wrong way." Daniel turned to her, his eyes brimming with tears. "How are you so calm? How can you stand there after giving up your life, your identity, and still speak with such peace?" Grace smiled faintly, though her tears fell freely now. "Because love has always been enough for me. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need the world to know who I was. I only needed you to grow up safe, strong, and loved. That was my purpose. And though it hurt to stay silent, I never regretted it." Daniel's heart cracked open further. He sank into the chair behind him, his body trembling. "I don't know if I can forgive either of you," he whispered. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I do know this. I can't look at you, Grace, and see just a maid anymore. I can't. You're more than that. You always were." Grace's eyes softened, a quiet smile gracing her lips. "That's all I ever wanted, that you finally see me. Not for recognition, but because love deserves to be seen." Mr. Williams bowed his head, his shoulders sagging. His voice was barely audible. "I don't deserve either of you. But if this truth costs me everything, I accept it. At least now it is no longer hidden." Daniel closed his eyes, his tears spilling freely. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know how to forgive or what their future would look like. But he knew one thing: his world had changed forever. And though the truth burned, it also began to heal. The night outside the mansion had grown darker, the sky a vast canvas of stars hidden behind heavy clouds. The study, with its walls of books and dim golden lamps, felt like a world of its own, sealed off from time, filled with nothing but truth, pain, and the possibility of healing. Daniel sat slumped in the chair, his face pale and streaked with tears. He stared at the carpet, his mind a storm. Across from him, his father sat hunched in his chair, his body frail, his eyes hollow with guilt. Between them stood Grace, calm, steady, her presence like a lighthouse in the middle of a raging sea. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint crackle of the fireplace. Finally, Daniel lifted his head. His voice was quiet, hoarse from crying, but it carried a weight that demanded to be heard. "You both broke me," he whispered, his eyes flicking between them. "Do you know that? All my life, I thought I understood who I was. I thought I knew where I came from. And tonight, in a single breath, you've torn it all apart. I don't know if I'll ever put the pieces back together." Mr. Williams winced, his chest heaving. "I know, son. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. I don't expect you to forgive me at all. I only pray that someday, when the pain isn't so sharp, you might understand why I did it, even if it was wrong." Daniel's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "You call this protecting me? You call this love? Hiding the truth, letting me treat my own blood like a servant while I worship a lie about a woman who abandoned me? That's not love. That's cowardice." The old man flinched, his shoulders collapsing inward. His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "You're right. I was a coward. I let pride dictate my choices. I couldn't face the shame of telling you the truth. I thought if I buried it, if I wrapped you in a lie, it would keep you safe. But all I did was plant seeds of pain. And now," he broke off, his hands covering his face, "now I see what it's done to you." Grace stepped closer, her calm voice weaving through the storm. "Shame is heavy, Daniel. It blinds even the strongest of men. But don't mistake cowardice for lack of love. Your father was weak, yes, but his weakness was born from fear of losing you." Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to reject her words, to hold on to his anger. Anger was easier. Anger made sense. Forgiveness felt like betrayal. Betrayal of all the years he had been kept in the dark. But when his eyes met Grace's, he saw no bitterness in her, no resentment for the sacrifices she had made. He saw only love, a love that had survived silence, lies, and decades of invisibility. And slowly, painfully, he began to wonder if forgiveness was not about excusing the past, but about choosing a different future. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. His voice cracked. "I don't know how to forgive. I don't even know where to start." Grace moved closer, kneeling beside him. She placed a hand on his trembling arm. Forgiveness is not a door you open all at once. It is a window you crack, little by little, until light finds its way in. Start by allowing yourself to see their pain as well as your own. Start by believing that love, even when flawed, was always there. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. "But why should I give him that?" He lied. "He let me grow up blind." Grace's gaze softened. "Because if you don't, Daniel, you'll chain yourself to anger forever. And anger, my child, will eat you alive." Her words echoed in his chest. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had seen it in his father, how pride, guilt, and anger had carved him into a hollow man. He didn't want that to be his future. He turned to his father, his voice unsteady. "Do you regret it, truly? Or do you only regret being caught?" Mr. Williams' hands trembled as he reached out, his voice breaking. "I regret every moment of it. I regret every night. I let Grace carry the weight I should have carried. I regret every lie I told you. I regret not being brave enough to tell you the truth when you were old enough to hear it. And yes, I regret being a coward most of all." His eyes brimmed with tears as he whispered, "I love you, Daniel. I have always loved you. But I failed you. I failed you both." Daniel's heart twisted. He wanted to stay angry, but the rawness in his father's voice cut through him. For the first time, he didn't see the proud, untouchable billionaire. He saw a man, broken and human, desperate for redemption. Grace looked at both of them, her voice firm but gentle. Love is not about perfection. It is not about always making the right choices. It is about staying, even when the choices are wrong. I stayed for Daniel. And now, both of you must choose. Will you stay for each other? Or will you let anger finish what lies began? The room went silent again. Daniel's chest rose and fell rapidly, his thoughts racing. Slowly, shakily, he rose to his feet. He looked at his father, really looked at him, for the first time in years. His father looked so small, so fragile. The man who had once seemed larger than life now sat hunched, trembling, eyes pleading like a child begging not to be left behind. And Daniel realized something he had never admitted before. His father was not unbreakable. He was human, flawed, weak, and perhaps that was the truth Daniel needed most. With a deep, shuddering breath, Daniel stepped closer. His voice trembled. "I can't forgive you tonight. Not yet. The wound is too fresh." But he swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I won't walk away. I won't let this end in anger. If you want to try, if you want to rebuild, then I'll stay." Mr. Williams' face crumpled, tears spilling freely. He reached out with shaking hands, and for the first time in years, Daniel did not pull away. Their hands met, rough and trembling, a fragile bridge between father and son. Grace placed her hands gently over theirs, her eyes shining. "This is the beginning," she whispered, "not the end." For the first time that night, Daniel felt a flicker of something new, something he hadn't felt since the storm began. Hope. And though the road ahead would be long and painful, he knew now that it was possible, because love, hidden or broken, was still love, and love, if nurtured, could heal even the deepest wounds. The night stretched deep into silence, the mansion quiet except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. For the first time in decades, the Williams study felt less like a place of business and more like a place of truth. Daniel still stood near his father, their hands linked awkwardly, both unsure how to bridge years of distance and deceit. Grace's hands rested gently over theirs, anchoring them like a living reminder of what they had both forgotten. Love was not a thing to be earned through perfection, but something that endured even through flaws. Daniel pulled in a shaky breath, finally letting go of his father's hand. He lowered himself into a chair opposite him, his face pale but calmer than before. His eyes, though weary, had softened slightly, though the storm had not completely passed. "I don't know where we go from here," he admitted quietly. Mr. Williams leaned back, his frail frame trembling slightly, his voice cracked, heavy with exhaustion. "Wherever you want us to go, son, I'll follow your lead. I've led this family for too long through pride and lies. It's time I learned to listen." Daniel's chest tightened. He had waited his whole life for his father to speak to him not as a businessman issuing commands, but as a man seeking connection. And now, hearing those words, he didn't know whether to cry or feel relief. Grace stepped back slightly, her gaze moving between them. "It begins with honesty," she said softly. "Not grand speeches, not promises you can't keep, just the courage to speak the truth and listen without anger." Her words lingered, and for a long while both men sat in silence, struggling to gather their thoughts. Then Daniel's eyes flicked up, landing on Grace. "Tell me," he said quietly, his voice laced with raw curiosity. "All those years, what was it like for you? Knowing the truth, carrying the weight of it, but never being able to tell me." Grace's lips curved into a sad smile. She sat down on the arm of a nearby chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Hard," she admitted simply. "Harder than words can explain, but also worth it. Every moment." Daniel frowned. "Worth it? How could it be worth living like a shadow in your own family? Worth being treated like a servant when you were my blood?" Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Because every time I tucked you into bed, every time you smiled, every time you ran into my arms when you were scared, that was worth it. I didn't need a title. I didn't need recognition. I only needed to see you grow into the man you were meant to be. That was enough." Daniel's throat tightened. Memories flooded back, memories he had buried under the label of Maid. Nights when Grace had sat at the foot of his bed, humming softly until he fell asleep. Mornings when she slipped an extra pancake onto his plate, whispering that it was their little secret. Days when she shielded him from his father's anger or the loneliness of a big, empty mansion. He had thought of them as acts of duty, but now, with the truth unveiled, he saw them differently. They had been acts of love, real sacrificial love. Daniel's chest heaved, and he covered his face with his hands. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, his voice muffled by tears. Grace's voice softened, wrapping around him like a blanket. "You don't need to deserve love, Daniel. You only need to receive it. That's the beauty of family." Across the room, Mr. Williams let out a broken sigh. His hands trembled as he spoke. "I stole that from you both. I let shame turn me into a thief. I robbed you of years you could have had as family, and I don't know if I can ever make it right." Grace turned to him, her expression gentle but firm. "You can't erase the past, but you can redeem the present. You can choose to be honest, to be present, to love without pride. That is how you begin to make it right." The old man bowed his head, his tears dripping onto his trembling hands. For the first time in his life, he wasn't a billionaire, a tycoon, or the head of the Williams empire. He was just a father, a broken one. Daniel studied him, conflicted emotions warring in his chest. The boy inside him still longed for his father's love, still craved the presence he had been denied. The man he had become still raged at the years of lies. And yet, seeing his father so vulnerable, so stripped of power, stirred something unexpected in him. Compassion. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a step toward it. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his voice low. "If we're going to try, if we're going to rebuild, then it has to be real this time. No more lies, no more secrets, no more hiding behind pride." His father lifted his gaze, hope flickering in his tearful eyes. "No more lies. I promise." Grace looked between them, her lips curving into a faint smile. "That's the beginning I was talking about." The three of them sat there, not as master and servant, not as businessman and heir, but as family bound by blood, pain, and now truth. Slowly, the walls of the study seemed less confining. The air, though heavy with grief, felt lighter with possibility. Daniel's thoughts drifted back through the years. He remembered being a little boy, asking his father to play ball with him in the yard, only to be told he was too busy. He remembered the sting of rejection, the ache of loneliness. And then he remembered Grace, kneeling in the grass, tossing the ball with him until sunset, cheering him on with laughter that filled the emptiness. A lump formed in his throat. "I see it now," he said softly, almost to himself. "You were always there, Grace. When he wasn't, you were." Her eyes shone as she nodded. "And I always will be. Blood or not, that will never change." Mr. Williams closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his wrinkled cheek. "I don't deserve either of you," he whispered again. "But if you'll let me, I want to try to be better, even if it's late." Daniel looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll try, but it won't be easy." Grace's voice carried a quiet strength. "The best things never are." The clock in the hall struck midnight, its chime echoing through the mansion, and though the hour marked the end of a day, for three of them, it felt like the beginning of something new. The truth had torn them apart, but in its wake, it also offered them the chance to rebuild, not on lies, but on love. And for the first time, Daniel dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could. The storm had passed. Not the storm of weather, but the storm that had raged inside the Williams family for decades, of lies, silence, and broken love. The mansion, usually silent with coldness, now carried a different weight. Not lighter, not yet healed, but changed. Daniel lay awake that night in his room, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed every word, every revelation, every tear. He felt as if his entire life had been rewritten in a matter of hours. And yet, beneath the ache of betrayal, there was something else stirring in him. Something fragile but undeniable. Hope. He rose from bed before dawn, drawn by an instinct he couldn't explain. His feet carried him down the long hallway, past the portraits of ancestors who had lived in grandeur but never faced the truths that bound them. He pushed open the door to his father's study. Inside, he found his father asleep in the chair, his frail body curled as if the weight of the truth had finally exhausted him. Beside him, a blanket draped neatly over his shoulders. Grace's doing, no doubt. She had always been there, quietly holding everything together, even in the moments no one noticed. Daniel's chest tightened as he looked at them both. Two people who had shaped his life in ways he had never truly understood. One by presence, the other by absence, and both by love, imperfect, broken, but still love. Later that morning, as sunlight poured through the tall windows of the dining hall, the three of them gathered again. It wasn't a planned meeting, but it felt necessary, as though the house itself demanded that they not let silence return. They sat at the table, not with formality, but with a quietness that spoke of fragile beginnings. The silverware gleamed, the breakfast untouched. Daniel broke the silence first. His voice was low but steady. "I've been thinking about everything." He looked at Grace, then at his father. "I can't change the past. None of us can. But I don't want to live in it anymore. If we're going to move forward, it has to be together, honest, real." Mr. Williams nodded, his eyes glistening. "You have my word. No more lies." Grace smiled softly. "And no more silence. Truth is heavy, but silence is heavier." Daniel exhaled slowly. For the first time, he believed them. They spent the morning not in confrontation, but in conversation. They spoke of the past, Daniel's childhood, his memories, the times his father had failed him, and the times Grace had carried him. They cried, they paused, they faltered, but they kept speaking. At one point, Daniel turned to Grace, his throat tight. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Not once, not even in secret." "Didn't you ever want me to know?" Grace's eyes softened. "Every day," she admitted. "Every single day, I wanted to tell you. But I knew the truth would only confuse you while you were young. And as you grew older, your father's fear became mine. I thought keeping the peace was better than breaking your world apart. Perhaps I was wrong. But I never kept silent because I didn't want you to know me. I kept silent because I want to protect you, even if it cost me." Daniel's eyes burned. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You've given up so much for me. Too much. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you." Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "Love isn't a debt, Daniel. It's a gift. And gifts are not meant to be repaid, only cherished." The word struck him like sunlight breaking through clouds. For years he had measured love in terms of worthiness, of deserving or not deserving. But here was Grace teaching him something different. Love, true love, was unconditional. The day wore on, and with each hour, the mansion began to feel less like a prison of lies and more like a home rediscovering itself. In the afternoon, Daniel walked the gardens with Grace. The roses bloomed in careful rows, their scent filling the air. He had walked here 1,000 times before, but today felt different. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly, his eyes scanning the blossoms. "Staying here, giving your life to a family that hid you in the shadows." Grace stopped, her gaze fixed on the flowers. After a long pause, she shook her head. "No, Daniel, because I didn't give my life to a mansion. I gave it to you, and that I will never regret." His throat tightened. He turned to her, the words catching in his chest. "Then let me give you something. At least, let me give you what you've always deserved." Her brow furrowed slightly. "And what is that?" Daniel swallowed hard, his voice trembling but resolute. "For the rest of my life, I won't call you just Grace. From now on, I'll call you what you've always been. Aunt Grace." Tears welled in her eyes. Her hand flew to her mouth as her body shook with emotion. She had waited decades for recognition, not of status, but of love. And here it was, spoken with the weight of truth and the power of healing. She pulled him into her arms, holding him close, her tears soaking his shoulder. "That is all I ever wanted," she whispered through her sobs. "For you to see me." As they embraced, Mr. Williams stood silently in the distance, watching. His own tears fell freely, but for once, they were not only tears of regret, they were tears of hope. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the three of them gathered once more in the study. The room that had witnessed secrets and brokenness now bore witness to something new. Grace stood between father and son, her voice gentle but firm. "This family has been built on wealth, power, and silence. But wealth fades, power breaks, and silence destroys. What remains, what will always remain, is love. Love that forgives, love that endures, love that chooses to stay, even when leaving would be easier." Her eyes moved between them, steady and knowing. "That is the truth I've carried all these years. That is the truth I want you both to live now." Daniel nodded slowly, his heart heavy but open. His father bowed his head, humbled by the wisdom of the woman who had held their family together in ways neither of them had ever truly seen. The three of them stood together, bound not by lies or roles, but by truth and love, imperfect, fragile, but real. And in that moment, Daniel realized something he would never forget. The greatest wealth a man could inherit was not money, not mansions, not empires. It was love, the kind of love that Grace had given freely, the kind of love that forgave, endured, and healed, the kind of love that turned brokenness into family again.